Should we care about the House of Usher as it falls? We're going to be discussing this question and a lot more tonight on a special bonus episode for YouTube on the fall of the House of Usher. This is Systematic Geekology. We are the Priest of the Geeks. I'm, of course, your host, Christian Ashley, joined by my fellow host, Kevin Schaefer. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great, Christian. How about you?
I'm okay, man.
Yeah.
Kevin already knows this, but audience-wise, if this stream goes down for any reason at all, it's because I don't have power right now at home. So I'm currently using a hotspot on my phone to have internet to stream this. So if it goes wonky, the power may come back on in the midst of this. It may not. I may be stuck in the darkness just brooding like I normally would anyways. But yeah, it's different when you choose to brood in the darkness and have the darkness forced upon you.
I said it's appropriate for this episode. I mean, what's a more
Yeah.
apt time for there to be darkness and brooding than discussing in Mike Flanagan, Edgar Allan Poe show?
I mean, pretty much. I mean, you were spot on with that remark, Kevin, before we started recording. But with all that in mind, just in case anything goes wrong, you know why. Kevin, what have you been geeking out on recently?
Well, this is a bit odd, but one I want to plug for anyone who has kids in your life right now. So my 3-year-old nephew is getting into Spider-Man, thankfully, because of there's a Disney Plus show called Spidey and His Amazing Friends. And
Yeah.
I love it because it's a delightful one. I mean, like when you watch shows with your kids or nieces and nephews, like some of them can be quite annoying. This one, I mean, of course, it brings me joy that he's 3 and he already knows who Peter and Miles and Gwen are. But it's a delightful series,
Yeah.
and I love that that's his introduction. And it genuinely is like really fun, even for adults to watch. Like it has all 3 of those characters as kids, and all the villains are kids too. So it has like Rhino and Green Goblin and Doc Ock, and they also have other Marvel characters show up like Black Panther, Miss Marvel, Hulk, etc. And so that's what I want to plug for. If you're listening, any parents out there or uncles and aunts that want to get your and I will say I did not even force it upon him. He discovered it himself and loves it. So I was like, yes, so I can't wait till he's like him and my niece are older and to watch all the movies and everything and get into the comics. So that I had to plug. Beyond that, a lot of movies around the holiday season in particular. My favorites right now, too, I want to plug are both in theaters. The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's sort of like Breakfast Club meets Dead Poet Society. It's about this disgruntled history teacher at a prep school who has to stay there over the holidays with all the kids who don't have anywhere else to go. And through that,
Yes.
it's like through that he forms this mentor apprentice relationship with one of the students, and it's just this really delightful, I think, new holiday classic, and it's uproariously funny and also very heartfelt, and the character drama is very earned and fluid, and that was easily one of my favorite movies of the year. So I highly recommend it if it's playing in a theater near you. Go check it out. The other is the new Nick Cage movie, Dream Scenario, which I got to see an advanced screening of, and this one is from it's from A24 and writer-director Christopher Borgli, which I haven't seen any of his other films, but this one is about Nicolas Cage plays also a professor who is this just everyman, and he feels totally ignored by everyone, but then all of a sudden he starts appearing in other people's dreams, both family and friends and then strangers, and he becomes this sensation. And he's not really even doing anything remarkable in those dreams, but often he's just standing by while something is happening. But then it takes a darker turn, and it's this very A24 style fusion of horror and comedy that I really liked. And so that I really enjoyed. I got to see an advanced screening that also had a live stream Q&A with the director afterwards. That was really cool. So those are a couple of the movies I wanted to plug. But what about you?
Excellent. I was planning on doing this anyway, but then the power went out. So I started reading with no distractions the Manitou, which is the first novel written by Graham Masterton. I think he's a British horror writer. I really enjoyed. There was a movie made in 78, I think, based off of it, but none of his other work that I'm aware of has ever had motion picture appeal. He's always been one of those writers you never hear about him compared to like Stephen King or Dean Koontz or John Saul or someone like that. Really enjoy his work. It's not for the faint of heart. There's some stuff there. If you're a little more, sensitive, I wouldn't recommend you read it. With horror, you always got to be careful with some people. And this is one thing I'd be a little more careful with people about, but I do enjoy the Manitou. That'd be my, what I'm geeking out on recently.
Very cool.
All
that
right.
sounds good.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's, real quick. It's basically one day this woman develops what looks like a tumor that they find is actually an ancient First Nations shaman called Misquamacus that is trying to rebirth himself in like a more modern age to get revenge for what happened to him in the 1600s. It's a lot of fun. It's, obviously not always the best culturally appropriate thing in the world. It's handled in the 70s, so you're not going to get our modern sensibilities about it. But if you take it from the timeline that it's in, you're fine.
That sounds
well, speaking,
check it out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of things taken from the past to be a bit more modernized, we are going to be doing a discussion on the fall of the House of Usher, which is Kevin. You want to go through a bit about what's happening here?
Yeah. So the fall of the House of Usher is Mike Flanagan's latest series and final one on Netflix. He's now going over to Amazon, and this is very much inspired by the works of Edgar Allan Poe. There's obviously the title, which is based on a Poe short story, and it follows this family that is the head of this major pharmaceutical company over the years that has become incredibly corrupt. And this isn't a spoiler because it's laid out in the pilot, but from the beginning that all of the adult children of the patriarch, Roderick Usher, all of them will die over the course of the season. And really each episode after the pilot follows the story of each of these adult children and their brutal demises. And so it's about that. It's also the detective lawyer character, Dupin, who has a long-standing relationship with Roderick Usher and his sister Madeline, who are the two leaders of the family. And initially he was an ally. He eventually became a rival. He's played by Carl Lumbly, and this character we'll get into, but he was actually like the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes and Poirot, and so is like one of the OG detective of literature, and and so has a really prominent role here. And the story is told not chronologically because it's like a lot of it is conversations with Dupin and Roderick Usher after all of the children have met their demise. And so that's sort of the base concept. And also there's these, again, elements we'll get into, but there's a character played by Carla Gugino who has some sort of supernatural element. We'll get into that, but she's sort of this background figure that is there the whole time. And we don't really get into the mystery of who she is until the finale. But yeah, that's it. So it is it's almost like the show is almost like Succession. If you got to see I haven't watched Succession, but I know the basics, but it's like that. If you get to see the family meet its epic demise.
Yeah. A great overview of the whole plot there, Kevin. Like, this is one of those shows that character exploration is encouraged, and you are encouraged to go along with them. If even you're definitely not supposed to cheer for these people, but at the same time, you're supposed to go, wait, there was a hope there. There was a chance there. You could have done something different. But as the circumstances go on, we learn, there really was no hope for any of these people along the way. The ending was going to come, but it's how we learn about how that inevitability was going to happen that really enhances the plot for me. But before we get into the show again, as you said before, this is based off the works of Edgar Allan Poe. What is your experience with him before this?
So oddly enough, even as an English major and someone's always read, I actually have not read a ton of Poe. I mean, I sort of read some short stories back in the day, but I came in with a pretty minimal exposure. And I did research afterwards because I really wanted to see, okay, how did they adapt the works? And because I saw these posts from big Edgar Allan Poe fans who were like, oh, I love just the countless Easter eggs and references, and not just within the titles and with the basic stories they adapted from, but I was reading an article earlier about all the elements of Poe's personal life that they embedded into the show. So it's fascinating to learn about, and I do want to go and read more. But yeah, it's interesting. I just like I don't remember we read a ton in high school, other than like a couple here and there. And then I really, even in college, I mean, really didn't read a ton of Poe literature, and so I want to now because this is very much invoked my interest in him. And I mean, he's one of those classic literary figures, and many of his stories have been adapted in the past, but this one is entirely like the Edgar Allan Poe universe brought to life, and in a modern context, like we said. But it takes all the
Yeah.
concepts and the characters that drawn from the short stories and poems and novels, and Mike Flanagan does his own thing with them. But yeah, it was pretty. But I imagine you have a bigger. I mean, I know as big of a reader you are, and like and I mean, you're a Stephen King fan and stuff. So I imagine you have a bigger
Yeah.
Poe influence or Poe exposure.
I do. It's one of those things. I remember vaguely in like maybe the third or fourth grade, we had never, excuse me, The Raven read to us as part of like around Halloween, kind of like a reading literature every now and then. One of my teachers did that, so I really appreciated that. There was also a time back in the days of the illustrated classics when they really started coming out in the 90s. They had one for Poe. It was called, what was it called? It was called like Tales of Mystery and Terror or something like that. And it collected some of his short stories. So that's how I read about the Cask of Amontillado, and was Goldbug in there, or the Telltale Heart. So a lot of what is happening here is based on some of his most popular short stories and one novel and a couple of poems that he wrote. I haven't been consistently reading it. I even have right behind me I have the entire collected works of Poe I got from
Nice.
oh goodness gracious, like an Ollie's or something like that. It was on sale for like $6, and it's like a huge everything. So I haven't read everything there, but I will at one point when I get through the thousands of books that I own that I've never gotten a chance to read.
Oh yes, don't we all? The never ending to be read pile that we all stack up.
It's like movies and shows like that. More just keeps coming out. So how am I supposed to watch what happened before? And I want to keep up with what's current. Which one do I choose? I only have so much time in the day.
Right.
But there you go.
No, that's really cool.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, that's. I mean, I was curious about your background with the works and characters. So yeah, that's a good setup. But yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. So getting into the show proper. How well do you think Flanagan did tying in some very different Poe stories, poems, and like the one singular novel he did for Pym's narrative? Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, to make this show.
I think he did really an excellent job because, I thought about the way he did works like Haunting of Hill House as well, where he did kind of a similar thing where he takes the concept and the nugget of the idea and then puts it in a modern context and, does his own story. It's a similar thing here, but, you have, I mean, the show is very focused. And like we talk about, it's the demise of this family and, and then the detective story and how that plays into it. And then the way he adapts the other tales is within each episode, where that one of the adult children is going to die. He bases how they go and their characters off different stories. And so, for instance, the second episode, which you see the first of the kids die. I say kids, but adult kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And which is by far the
children of.
I don't know. There's two very brutal episodes. Not that they aren't all brutal, but this one and one particular other are especially brutal. But in this one, so it's the youngest, and he is an illegitimate child of Roderick, and he is the ultimate just into debauchery and spending all his wealth on just sex and big parties and everything. And I'm sorry but these we should have said spoilers ahead here. But at the end of this episode, he throws this big, massive debauchery party, and everyone there, and it's in this old warehouse, and at the end of it, the water is poisoned and it comes down on them, and gas leaks, and they all die brutally. And it's based on an Edgar Allan Poe story in which there was a prince who was also go through this big masquerade and to avoid a plague that they ended up catching anyway. And so that's an example where he takes like the idea and then modernizes it, and and it fits very well within the context of the larger narrative as well. There was also an episode with the Black Cat that is also very much like based on that story, and he does it with another one of the adults who dies. And so, yeah, I thought it was very cohesive, and that it really takes all of those ideas from Poe's works, adapts them well. And I mean, some are more faithful to the stories than others. Some are changed a lot. I mean, they have the title, but then it changes its own thing. But I never felt like anything was out of place. It all flowed very well. It had plenty of Easter eggs and references, and again, it tells a singular narrative while pulling from these different stories to lay out the different episodes. If that makes sense. But yeah, I think it's a really clever adaptation. And not everyone can do that. Like, I mean, some would do a more straight adaptation, set it in like 19th century or whatever, and then but to modernize it like this and still maintain the feel and the aesthetic of Poe, I think is really impressive.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is one of those, you don't need to have read the source material to understand what's happening here, but it greatly enhances your ability to appreciate what's on screen, to at least have a knowledge of Poe's works. Like, because there were references I didn't get from stories I've forgotten about, or Pym's story this whole time is like, wait, I remember that name. Poe wrote a novel, and then it made me remember, oh, that's what actually happened there. And the references to all the stuff that happened on his worldwide trip, they modernized it a bit, as you need to do in like a pragmatic way. I completely enjoyed this show. Like, this was just a lot of fun to be in this world, which is odd for me as someone who really hates more downer endings and exploring characters that like have no redeeming value to them at all. This makes me care about them. And that's great writing, because normally when I see something like this, I go, well, you've wasted my time making me watch a story about someone I don't care about, who is just pure evil or does evil things. And yeah, they do plenty of very evil things throughout the show, but there's always that, if you had just done this, if you had just listened to this person, maybe things would have been different. But yeah, Flanagan does it amazingly here. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think it's a great point too, and I often have the same feeling. That's why a friend who was initially surprised that I liked something like this that is so dark and so, because a lot of times I do like dark stories, but like you said, it has to have the right draw and the right hook, and it has to make me care about the characters. And I think one of the biggest strengths here is that instead of just jumping into the deaths and everything and like the fall of the family, the pilot really solidifies why you're intrigued, at least for me, why I was intrigued from the beginning, because it's, I mentioned earlier that a lot of it is conversations with Roderick at the end of his life and Dupin, and Roderick is recounting all this stuff, and he goes into, I mean, not in extreme detail, but he talks about his upbringing and with Madeline, his sister, and how they had a really rough childhood, and then they were more like, you see them in the adults as the elite and the upper class and everything, whereas they started out as just everyday people like us. And so you see the progression of how they became sucked into this world, and faced often the same kind of oppression and inequality that we become frustrated about. So it's a fascinating journey to see them go from these poor orphans to the horrible, the capitalistic, just greedy behemoths that they eventually become, and the leaders of this empire. And so I think the pilot does really well. Again, the non-chronological storytelling really enhances all of that. You get to see different areas of life, and you get to see the mystery unfold. That was the other thing too. It's not just watching this family meet brutal deaths and have this really dark ending. There's this whole mystery throughout of Carly Gugino's character and all the elements surrounding. So there's so much that's intriguing and that's captivating that really kept my interest throughout. It wasn't just watching a Succession like family and watching them all die. There was so much more depth beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kevin, we've talked about the characters. Is there one that is like your favorite out of all? We got a great cast here. Like, is there one that just
Yes.
jumps
Oh
out like,
gosh.
that's my guy, that's my girl?
Well, performances across the border were just, I mean, Flanagan has always done a great job of selecting top tier actors, and it's cool to see a lot of them in multiple of his shows and movies, because that I think is the mark of a good director, when, the actors want to keep working with them. But for me, I think not just because he was one of the only like genuinely good guys in the show, but the performance. So Dupin with Carla Lumbly, I mean, that guy is so underrated. I mean, of course, I grew up on the Justice League animated series where he voiced Martian
Yeah,
Manhunter.
yeah.
And then, and we've seen him in Falcon Winter Soldier. And I mean, he's just a thespian, but he's just one of those, I feel like, does not get enough recognition for how good an actor he is. And he should be in more roles. And he will be in the next Flanagan project I saw, which is a Stephen King adaptation. So I'm really excited for that. But he was probably, I mean, it's easy to put him as my favorite character because, again, he's the one you're actually rooting for.
Yeah.
And even then, I just loved his approach where, at the end of the show, like, he could have just like outright killed Roderick or whatever, I mean, he could have, like, but instead he has this like really endearing lengthy conversation with him where he wants to know everything about his past and everything that led to this point. And so I really like that. If I had to pick one, because the majority of the characters are villains and people you can't stand, but if I had to pick
Yes.
one, I did like Napoleon a lot, and again, part of it is I love that actor, Rahul Kohli, who was also, he gave a great performance in Midnight Mass, and I listened to a podcast with them. Really, just great actor, and also I think was underrated for a long time, and is now really showing the depths of how much he can perform and everything, and the characters he can play. And so, but I think I saw that character as, I think, a little more complex. Like, I liked the relationship with him and his boyfriend, and I mean, he still has so many flaws, but I actually I saw empathy within him, and particularly for the younger brother who I mentioned earlier, who's also an illegitimate one, and like,
Prospero.
Yeah, exactly, and like everyone else hated him, but Napoleon kind of looked out for him, and so I just liked him as most. A lot of the others, I mean, great actors, but I could not wait for the characters to die. Like, like, for instance, I think the most egregious was, this is how Mike Flanagan is such a good writer director. He makes you hate the guy who played the kid in E.T., Henry Thomas, who is also in Haunting of the House. He plays the most despicable character in this show, and you could not wait for him to go. But also, again, great performance, and I get why they did that. So yeah, while there are not a lot of likable characters, there is great performances all around. I mean, Mark Hamill plays the kind of sinister lawyer to the family, and I mean, anytime you see Mark Hamill in anything, it's a treat. But it's such a great ensemble. Like, Kate Siegel is back in this, who's Mike Flanagan's wife. Samantha Sloyan, again, plays a very unlikable character, but just such great acting across the board. But what about you? Do you have a favorite character or favorite performance?
I do, but to talk about yours real quick. I love Dupin. His performance was amazing. Mm-hmm. That reveal that comes in, you get the first episode? It says, I have an informant in the family, and you're wondering, who is it? Who could it be? And I had speculated maybe there was no one, but I was leaning towards it actually being Frederick, and that being like, like wanting to sell out his dad and take the company did it. That was like him growing a spine, but that didn't happen, obviously. There was no informant at all, and he completely got me. I love that so much, because you would think, well, he's the good lawyer. He's not going to pull not a prank, just a play like that. And he totally did, because he had enough with this family. And you see why after all that. Like, really well done. I did love Napoleon as well. A great guy. As far as this family is concerned, like not totally clean. Like, he's still a drug dealer. He's still not the greatest supportive, brother to the other ones, but he does have the redeeming moment with Prospero. It's like, hey, everyone else hates you, I'm going to look after you. He does it in a very poor way, but growing up in the screwed up family, I can't imagine any other route he would have taken. But my guy is going to be, um, sorry, lost my voice there for a second. Arthur Pym. Mark Hamill
Okay,
did a
yeah, yeah,
fantastic job.
yeah,
He is in a world of scummy people, a competent scummy person,
yeah.
and you gotta admire that to an extent. You don't have
Mhm,
to, be
mhm,
like you're a good person. No, no.
mhm.
I admire you're getting away with this stuff. The way the family gets away with stuff is because you're just that good at your job. And Kevin, I'm the reason why Clark Kent is going to have his job at the Daily Planet because I didn't recognize he was Mark Hamill until about halfway through the show. In the same way that I didn't recognize that Madeline was Laura Roslin from Battlestar
Yeah,
Galactica until like halfway
yeah.
through the show. It's like I'm an idiot. Like Superman could be right in front of my face, and I'd see Clark Kent a second later and be like two different dudes, right? No, that which actually I think speaks to the quality of their acting too, and
Yeah,
that they're
it
able to
does.
embody this role. But like I just love like even like Verna herself gives
Mm,
Pym like some kudos, like hey, like it's been a while since someone tried to get the drop on me. You failed,
mhm,
obviously,
mhm,
but hey man, that's pretty dang good, and offers him a deal, and yet he says no.
mhm.
That is amazing to me as a character choice because he's like, hey, I've lived as long as I have. I'm done with this. If we're gonna fall, we're gonna fall together. Love that as well. I did enjoy Prospero too, as this like young upstart and like, hey, I'm trying to fit in, but I don't know my place. I didn't grow up with money, and now I'm in it with a ton of money, and I'm going to do my own thing. And obviously, he didn't check the sprinklers for what could possibly be in there. Why would he think that? And ends up with a terrible fate. It's just awful for the poor guy. But
And it really,
actually,
I mean, you look at a
yeah,
character like that
go ahead.
who, yeah, like, I mean, on the outside, he is like horrible. He's like, oh, this selfish, like, kid, punk kid, and all that. But like he said, I think you empathize with them because, again, he is an illegitimate child. All his siblings can't stand him except for Napoleon. And like, he has this unfair, there's so much like working against him. And so you kind of understand why he goes the path that he does.
Yes.
Even though it's not the right one, he's still, you see a lot of that and you do feel for the guy at the core because, and like, to be born into such a messed up family, like, I mean, how do you really
Yeah.
navigate that? Yeah.
No, this is extremely well done. I will say real quick, Roderick Usher, love. Who is the actor's name? Real quick,
Bruce
let me look that
Greenwood.
up.
Oh,
Yes,
another
Bruce Greenwood.
actor uh,
Yes,
who should be a household name. I mean, Bruce Greenwood is just
no, yeah,
brilliant. Oh, okay, yeah.
yeah. He does phenomenal. Going through is like, hey, I know who I am as a person. I'm not making excuses. Like I did these decisions. I intentionally did these things. And yet at the same time, like if he has a child, you're in the family, doesn't matter what. Like there are plenty of people in his same position who would have said, no, you're not mine or anything. Like he brings him in, not that he brings him into a really loving family, but you got to admire that to an extent compared to other people.
Mhm, mhm.
And like owning up to his sins, owning up to what he and Madeline did.
Yeah.
Uh, just amazing. Well done overall. But that's enough about characters for right now. How about episodes, Kevin? You have one that like jumps out at you. That's my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the Carlo Gugino mystery really captivated me throughout. So, as such, I really love the finale because I was like
Yes.
really curious to see. It's like, from the beginning, okay, there's some kind of supernatural element tied to her. You know that was her back at the New Year's Eve in, what was like 1979. And like that was the same character. And, here she is showing up
Mm-hmm.
again. And so, like, that like something of throughout that the series, something happened on that New Year's Eve at the bar, and that was where everything fell down, and like they were tied to some kind of supernatural guilt, but you don't know what it was. And so when they got to the finale, I was very satisfied by all the reveals there of that
Yes.
she was sort of like, she's not the devil. I mean, we'll talk about her more in a minute, but she's some kind of like, so like she offers this choice for if you want to take it's almost like the writer of blue pill kind of thing. Like, I mean, she offers the choice
Mm-hmm.
to these powerful figures and can influence them, and she can in turn reward them with prosperity, but also eventual demise and downfall. And so the deal is sealed at that meeting. Then it also reveals in that episode what happens to Roderick and Madeline's former boss, who they end up killing,
Yes.
and so, and again, that because sometimes when you have a big mystery built up, the reveal can be underwhelming when there's so much like pressure on it. This is one where I thought the reveals were very satisfying. It gave me everything I wanted to
Yes.
know, and it wasn't. There was still just enough ambiguity to leave some to the viewer's imagination, but not to a frustrating extent. If that makes sense, like it gave me all the information I
Yeah.
wanted, and it just ended really well. Like I mean, again, for the show I was enjoying throughout, I was just really glad that the finale really checked all the marks for me. So I think that probably is my favorite episode. Beyond that, I did like the Black Cat a lot because again, I liked
Okay.
Napoleon, and there were some really good horror elements there. For a show that is not like outright scary, it's more eerie and gothic atmosphere and all that. But that one did have some good jump scares and some good, really good camera work and everything. So I like that one. But do you have a favorite one or two?
Well, I'm going to agree with you. The finale is the best one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is the culmination of everything that has been building up. The
Mm-hmm.
relationship between Dupin and Roderick, and like where they're left off, like where Verna ends up is like,
Yeah.
hey, we learn about what, as much as possible, what she is and what she does. You get into the Cask of Amontillado session where Roderick and Madeline both put their boss, was his name Rufus or something like that,
Yeah, I think so.
behind where no one else is ever going to find him. Because that's one of my favorite Poe stories as well, because you get that sense of like, for the love of God, Montresor, why is this happening? Like, we don't really know. Is it because of a slight? Well, this one becomes a lot better in that, hey, like this guy is the scum of the earth, and they're going to end up becoming the scum of the earth. But right now, it's like you kind of feel, okay, yeah, I don't get too upset that you're putting him behind these bricks together. Like you have the choice with every brick you're laying to stop this, and they don't. They just keep going and they keep going. It's incredible character work. But if I didn't have to choose a finale, it would be the Mask of Red Death, the second episode.
Yeah.
And just that scene at the end, I am squeamish around body horror, but it is done extremely well with the acid coming out of the sprinklers, killing all those people who, they weren't exactly the greatest people in the world, but that's not exactly the fate I would have had for all of them, if I was handing it out to them. But that sense to, you start also getting a little bit more about Verna too there, as like how she handles Prospero, and she's like, hey, nothing personal. This is just how things have to go. Now, your mileage may vary about whether she's being truthful this whole time. We'll get to that later on. But those are my episodes right there. You have anything you want to add there?
No, great picks. And I'll say, I mean, like with episode 2, it's like, what's going to happen, it's going to be horrific, but it's still just seeing that unfold is terrifying.
Oh, yes.
Probably even more so is at the beginning of the next episode when Frederick's wife wakes up and like she survives that, but oh my gosh, like that was one of the most harrowing moments I've seen in TV, maybe ever, but definitely in Flanagan's work. I mean, that was just like, oh gosh, she is like, her body is just, severely burned to say the least. And she survives and has to endure that. Oh gosh.
Yeah, horrendous, but so well shot, so well done, so well acted. Like there's very few gripes I have with the show. And episodes like that are why. Like things are just done well. But we mentioned, kind of glossing over it, like one of the main conflicts of this whole series is like between the rich, uptight Usher family that has all this prosperity, does all these evil things in order for the sake of more, money and greed and power, against the poor, but also a bit uptight himself in his own way, Dupin. Like, how do you think this was handled?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think the dynamics played out well. And by the way, I was pronouncing wrong earlier. I know it's Dupin. I was saying Dupin earlier, but
hey,
but yeah.
I am not the person to ever say, "Hey, you're pronouncing that wrong." I just had like an episode yesterday where I was pronouncing Murtag instead of Sorry, I was saying Murtag instead of Murtag for Aragon.
It's right.
Yeah.
Oh,
so go for it, man.
But yeah,
you're in good company. Continue.
Right. But I really like the dynamics there, and the power play and everything. And as far as like, I know we were looking at the outline too, as far as like, do you think there, when it gets into the politics and the, portrayal of the Usher family, was it too heavy handed at times? Yes, to an extent. I didn't think it was over. I mean, I really admire Flanagan's writing. And this was
Hmm.
obviously a very criticism of the elite upper class. And, and I think it would have helped to have maybe one of the characters in the Usher family be more liberal and still have like flaws and show that dynamics. But it was still overall well handled. But I think with Dupont, it just like, he's just one of my favorite characters in the show. And I love how you see the relationship unfold. Again, he's an ally to Roderick and Madeline at the beginning, back in
Hmm.
when they were just starting out, and then becomes a rival, and you just see their paths cross the whole time throughout the series, and I just loved how that all unfolded.
Absolutely. Like when you get more, there's tension between the two of them at the very beginning of the show, and you go, how is this possible? How did this happen? What did the war between them start? And you go, they were on the same side, and they were so close to doing some good in the world at great personal
Uh-huh.
cost. And that wasn't good enough for Roderick. Then he needed the company. It was his father's company. He needed to be the one making the decisions. He needed to be the one with Madeline by his side. The two of them like working together, and like she's sending him these seeds of maybe we shouldn't be listening to this guy, and then he believes it and causes the entire case to go out
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because they make the deal. Well, after that they make the deal, but so that they can get closer to their new boss
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
worm their way up to the top. And then it creates 30 plus years of havoc for the
Uh-huh.
American system, and the terrible drugs that they introduced that, they're not that addictive, which is its own case is like, well, there's plenty of pills right now in America that do get rid of pain. But if you take too much, if you're not able to handle it well, you end up hooked to them. And well, the pain is gone, but I need that, what I had from that release of having that, in my system. I don't have it anymore. So I have to steal for it. And people, go to crime for it just so they can feel that high again. And that's obviously a well placed take on the medical care system in America, which has its immense flaws. Some may say a little too heavy handed, but I think for this one in particular, they handled it really well. Now, you kind of mentioned like the next question. I'll go ahead and bring that up since they kind of tie in a
Yeah.
little bit here.
Sure. Sure.
So, like, one criticism against the show, and that's one I would levy against it to an extent,
Uh-huh.
is that
Sure.
it's incredibly heavy handed in how its villains and those associated with making deals with Verna are all conservatives without a single liberal explicitly noted as making a deal with her. I think I went through a list and it was like 15 people. Like some mentioned my name, some through photos, and every single one of them was more conservatively minded. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong about that. I fully admit that, but like the list I was looking through, it seemed to suggest that. Like, do you think that's a valid criticism against his show or not?
It is. I mean, I think like and he again, he's making a point, and he has like at the end, it's like he wants to like kind of take down Trump era and stuff like that. But I think it would have helped, particularly in this highly influential family. It would just make sense for at least one of them to have kind of different views, even if they're tied to the family empire. I just
Yeah.
think that would have added some nuance to it. But it didn't like kill it for me or anything. But yeah, it does get a little heavy handed, even though that monologue by Madeline at the end, very well written, and it's like, and there's some good
Mm-hmm.
performance there. But it is like, yeah, it's like, okay, we get it. But um, but yeah, I mean, I get why he chooses this angle and he wants to criticize on that, and that's fine. But yeah, I just think if it had been like one character, maybe it again would have added a little bit of nuance there, and made it
Yeah.
a little more interesting. Again, it didn't like kill the show or anything for me, but yeah, it is a valid criticism.
I agree. And just for frame of reference, like Kevin, you probably mentioned on the show before, you're more a little liberal progressive than I am. If you want to use a different term to describe yourself, have at it. I don't want to
Yeah,
like throw words your way. And I'm
sure,
more, conservative in mine. Like,
sure.
so just so you know where our politics are for those listening,
Hmm.
like, and it's very plainly obvious they're not a one-to-one relation, but they are very closely tied to like the Trump family in
Yeah,
this sense. And I'm not a defender of Trump by any stance.
Mhm.
The fact that he ever became the Republican nominee is a strike against the Republicans in my mind, and that's one of the reasons why I've been a registered independent since I could vote in 2008.
Yeah.
I just never been represented in my heart by either party.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
felt for as long as I've been able to vote. So that's just my take. So obviously it's something that needs to be brought to the fore and say we need to criticize these aspects. You can't have a terrible, group of families like this controlling things and causing
Mhm.
harm to other people and
Mhm.
abusing their money, growing more greedy and not paying their employees as well. Like I'm all for that
Yeah.
general idea, especially when you show how other people who align a different way politically do the exact same thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And when we go through the montage, I don't think I saw the Clintons in there. Not to say like the Clintons are, the worst people in the
Yeah. Okay.
world, but
That's
compared
a good
to
point.
like
I
the
think.
conservatives, yeah, you don't have like George Soros there or anyone like that.
Yeah.
And once again, this
Yeah.
is not like I hate all liberals. This is like examples I can think of
Right.
from a more liberal slant that could have been added to that menagerie of characters we see who made deals with Verna.
Right. Because I mean, it's just like Verna was again targeting all these influential people. It doesn't really make sense to only go after ones of like one party. So I mean, she was going after all these like world leaders and stuff. So that's a valid point there too. That it would have felt the show kind of like everyone more in that montage there.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I wrote the question. I believe in the question. I think it's way too heavy-handed for its own good. It would have been better handled, more nuanced, like you said
Sure.
earlier,
Sure.
if both sides had been shown. But that's what we ended up with. So that's where we are. Is there
Right.
anything you want
Right.
to add to
Right.
this before we
No,
move
I
on?
think that's. I mean, yeah, I'm good, but yeah, I mean, it's an appropriate, especially when you bring this kind of story into a modern context. It's appropriate to like make these criticisms against, the highly influential families and pharma companies and all these people who are at the top and oppressing so many people. But yeah, a little nuance would have, I think, helped it more. But it's still good, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, I still incredibly enjoy this show.
Yeah, yeah, oh
Very
yeah,
few things I've ever watched do I not have like a single criticism like levied against
yeah,
it.
sure.
And this, like, I have criticisms. It's okay. You're allowed to criticize things you love just as much as you're
Sure,
allowed to criticize things you don't like or are
sure.
mediocre about. But moving on from there, we brought her up a couple of times. Verna herself,
Yeah.
if she is actually female at all
Mhm.
or human in any way
Right.
or a demon or a higher being, what have you, like in your mind,
Mhm.
Kevin, is Verna a villain, a force of nature, or something else I haven't mentioned? Like, where do you stand on her?
Yeah, I almost put her into like this own category, something else. Like, because I was talking about with another friend who watched the show, and it's like she's not the devil. Like, she's not the one who, like, who because the evidence there is, you see her, make this deal with Roderick and Madeline, but then she also offers the same thing to Arthur Pym by the end of the
Mm-hmm.
series, and he rejects it, and she doesn't pursue him at that point. So like she's this kind of void of temptation, I guess, is where like she lays out the grounds for like what happens if you accept her deal, and it's totally up to the individual. But I thought that was a really cool scene with her and Arthur because it
Yes.
showed what happened if like okay that you can there have been people who have encountered her and rejected the deal
Yes.
and she doesn't
And
whereas
it's not
I
like
think
they're roses either.
exactly whereas I think if it was like a demon or like they would pursue more like they would do everything they could to influence and like wreak havoc and she's really just like attracted to wealthy or influential people or people who could be really influential and she wants to offer that choice and see how it plays out. It's hard to figure out exactly what the motivation is there, but that's what I love about her is she is like they still leave it where they explain enough about who she is but still really mysterious, and so that's pretty cool.
Yes. Yeah. I've looked online. I don't think I think I'm in the minority here and where I fall on her.
Uh-huh.
I think she is 100% unambiguously evil.
Yeah.
And because most takes I see is like she's just like this force of nature or what have you. She just makes deals. So she's just fascinated by humanity, which is something she says. But looking at my source and looking at the actions done by the deals she makes, I don't see any good on her side either. So I
Yeah.
see
Oh,
her as
okay.
like, yeah, yeah, this is every deal she makes, it is for evil gets done, not in her
Oh, yeah.
name necessarily,
Yeah.
but because of her actions. Like, even if she had given it to Pym, like, she stands down when he says no, but he's already done a ton of evil things. So it's not like
Yeah.
she's losing some great pawn or
True.
creating a new one. And when I look at how she handles like the ushers when she kills them, it's almost looking almost like a peaceful kind of Grim Reaper kind of sense
Yeah.
of, this is your last moments. I'm going to give you some peace. It's like, no, it's like, hey, this is how terrible all you people are. You deserve this. And even Lenore, who we haven't really touched on too much here, is
Yeah.
granddaughter of Roderick Usher. She is like our unambiguously like, we should be doing better things. Like, Dad, why
Yeah.
aren't you like helping people? Why aren't you helping Mom? Uh, she is Frederick. Excuse me, Frederick. That's one of the titles they give him, Frederick. And what is his wife's name? Does it start with M?
I forget off the top of my head. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I know
have
what
to
you're
look
talking
it up.
about. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and like she is like, or like, as compared to her grandfather, especially good versus his, like, I've fallen into evil. I'm going to stay there because of who I am. And she's like his one morality pet he has. And you get Verna in the final moments being like, hey, like, as part of the deal, I have to kill all the offspring, and you're one of them. And like, I think that's one of the most evil things I've ever heard from a character. That's how I
Yeah.
took that scene. In that, some people took it as, oh, well, she's just being comforting. Like, she has to go by the deal she made. I'm like, no, this is like the final, like, screw you to Roderick. It's like, I gave you all this and you ended up with nothing. And you, Lenore, who has done nothing to deserve any of this as compared to your family,
Hmm.
I'm going to cause some more evil by the one person who could have done something good here. I even think she lies about what her mother does after
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and this is like to twist the knife even further and be like, oh, well, she's going to get all this grant money and she's going to give it away and start foundations. And I'm like, I don't know if this fits your character, Verna. I think that's what you want us to think. Now, I could be
Yeah.
dead wrong. I don't think Flanagan has come out one way or the other, but I see her as like this, in my mind, unambiguous, totally 100% evil, but I'm going to play it off. I'm going to be like that angel of light and make
Yeah.
you think, oh, this had a purpose. How about you? Anything else
I
you
mean,
want to add there?
I definitely don't see her as good by any means, but I like again that it leaves that enough ambiguity there to say is like to ask is like, is she a straight up demon or is she this like force of like to influence and move people, but cause them to make their own decisions? So that's what I like about it. Oh, I definitely do not see her as a force of good by any means. She is pretty
Yeah.
twisted and like again, all the deals she makes are going to lead to horrible outcomes. And so,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but I just love Carla Gugino's performance in it so much. She's just so
Oh, she does
captivating there.
fantastic.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the takes I saw were basically in the middle of like, she's just some whatever out there. She may be tied to like those strange people that Pym saw on his trip. Like, she says she saw him there. So maybe she's like a being from the hollow earth or something like that, or, just some entity. But I see her as more of a devilish figure, not being the devil herself, but tied in so that evil can spread on the world. But hey, guys, let us know what you think. I mean, there's plenty of room in the
Yeah.
comments below. So, like, this is how I read Verna. This is how my reasons for why I think that way. Like, I gave my little spreadsheet information. Kevin, you gave yours. Like, we'd
Yeah.
like to hear what you have to say too. Well,
Yeah.
Kevin, before we end here, is there anything else you want to bring up that I wasn't in the questions or the outline or anything?
We covered a lot, and it's definitely one I'm going to rewatch for sure. Because I binged like half of it in one day, and then the rest like over a next weekend. And so I really want to like kind of go back and absorb each episode more because there's a
Mm.
lot to catch. And so, but yeah, it's just I can't recommend it enough. I think Midnight Mass is still my favorite Flanagan show so far.
Yes.
But this is either a close second or third. It's like Midnight Mass, Haunting of Hill House, and this are my top three. I'm not sure exactly which order, but they're all just like really phenomenal. But yeah, I just like I mean, again, in a show where you're watching horrible people meet their demise, even though that's the main premise, there's so much more to it than that, and it's so rich with
Yes.
themes and characters and questions of good and evil, and it's a great one to look at. Like,
Well, how would you rate this out of 10, Kevin?
Oof, I'd have to. I mean, definitely have to. I'd say like 9. I mean, there's very few criticisms I have it, and
Yeah.
it was wildly entertaining. So if 9.95, like I mean, it's a high praise for me.
Yeah, I think with Flanagan stuff, I would probably rate Midnight Mass a 10 out of 10
Yeah, yeah,
after some time. That way,
yeah.
if I have more time divorced away from the show, I don't want like recency bias to get in my way. I might rate it a little
Right.
higher. But right now, it's like a 9.5 for me.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
I said, phenomenal show, great character acting, great storylines here, a great adaptation of a lot of Poe's works too, and a more modern spin. Well done overall. Like,
Yeah,
highly recommend that you guys check out the show.
definitely.
All right, so as we're wrapping up here, Kevin, recommendations for the audience. What do you got for them?
Yeah. So other than anything, Mike Flanagan, this one's a bit of very different. But I mentioned watching a lot of movies over the break. One I really want to highlight is a documentary on Max right now called, I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's called David Holmes, The Boy Who Lived. And this is the story of the stunt double for Daniel Radcliffe on the Harry Potter movies. And during
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so during the filming of the final movie, he got into a major accident and became paralyzed. And so, immediately his career ends. And that was in 2009. And so the movie is about really just his life story. And much of it is focused on, who he is now, how he's adapted, all the like ups and downs since the accident and what he's doing now. As a disabled person, I thought it was a really good portrayal. I mean, I liked that the filmmakers really gave David the space to tell his story. It felt very raw and open. As someone who has been disabled my whole life, watching stories like these, it's different. Like their experience is very different from mine because, he had the first half of his life living as non-disabled, and then he immediately went, his life was upended, and now he has to adapt to being paralyzed and a wheelchair user. And so, I'm always fascinated in seeing how people in those situations grapple with that, and and David has like a really great outlook on life, and it never feels like a cheesy, like, just overly inspiration movie kind of thing. It's just a very real human story. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well done, and it's really cool that to see how his and Daniel Radcliffe's friendship has maintained and even strengthened over the years. Because that's one of the things you think about. Like, I think a lot of people, when they're watching big tentpole franchises, they're like, "Oh, are Harry, Hermione, and Ron like still best friends?" And Daniel Radcliffe was saying, really, the thing that people don't think about is like, I mean, I love those guys, but you develop so many relationships with a lot of the crew members.
Yes.
With him and David and one of the other stunt guys, like they were like, I mean, Daniel Radcliffe looked up to David like an older brother, and so it's really cool to see that relationship. So that's one I highly recommend. Again, like within a geek culture, but also just a real life story. So I'm really glad to watch that the other day.
Excellent. Yeah, I knew that was in production. I didn't know it had been released yet because I saw an article forever ago about it. But my recommendation is going to be something for those of you who are big in the Friday Night Fright stuff that we do here. I am reading up on the Betty and Barney Hill case for our ufology section for December. And one of the main sources I'm using is my recommendation, Captured: The Betty and Barney Hill Experience. I think it's by Kathleen Marden and Stanton T. Friedman. As much as you can be in a situation like this when one of the family members is one of the contributors to it, I think it's very well handled, very as balanced as possible. Telling here's what people say this couldn't have happened. Here's what people say, well, they actually believe it could have happened. It's very well done. Highly enjoyed reading it. I'm also reading The Interrupted Journey, which is the first book in that told the story in the 60s. So there's that. So listeners, thank you for what you do here for this special kind of bonus episode. I just kind of kidnapped Kevin so that we could both talk about something we really enjoy. Like, this wasn't planned. I just said, hey, you want to do this? He was like, yeah.
I love how you say that while you're in the pitch black background, like you could actually kidnap me or have something in the back there. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm not lying. I thought the power would be back on by the time we finish this up, but nope. here we are.
Again,
So
perfect aesthetic for it. If we're gonna have an episode where the lighting is terrible, this is appropriate to discuss
oh
Fall of
yes.
House of Usher.
So yeah, this was a ton of fun, guys. If you just get a chance, just subscribe to us on YouTube, share this episode, like it, comment down below about anything that you want more clarification on, or like, hey, I didn't like your take here. Here's why. Like, we're always open to constructive criticism.
Yeah.
That's one of the things here I really do enjoy. If like someone says something that I don't agree with, but they construct the argument well, I'm all for hearing that. But also as well, just check out Patreon. Just join us there to help keep the lights on here. Well, not in my house right now, but maybe for the show itself. But remember, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.